It was one of those mornings the mountains seemed to breathe. October 2003. Air sharp as glass. The sun filtering through golden maples along the Appalachian Trail. Two friends, Rachel Dean, 26, and Aaron Cole, 28, signed their names at the ranger station in western North Carolina, laughing as they shouldered their packs. The ranger remembered them clearly. Cheerful, careful, the kind of hikers who double-checked their maps and carried extra batteries. Their dog, a black shepherd mix named Juniper, circled the truck before bounding ahead up the path. No one thought much of it then. The Blue Ridge sees 1,000 hikers a season, but no one knew that by the week's end, their names would be carved into the region's folklore. The trail wound high through the ridgeline, blazes painted white on bark slick with dew. It was the kind of autumn morning that made the woods feel endless, smelling of wood smoke from distant cabins and cold streams running over moss. Local legend says these hills hum after a frost, that you can hear old miners whispering if you stop long enough to listen. Rachel joked about it that first day, pointing her camera toward a fog bank rolling across the valley. Ghosts of hikers who never made it back, she said, smiling. Aaron shook his head. If we vanish, we'll leave a note, he teased. By evening of that first day, another backpacker crossing Cold Spring Gap saw their small orange tent tucked between two birches. Rachel waved, offered coffee from a camping stove. They planned to make the overlook called Devil's Window by the next afternoon. Nothing seemed out of place. The following morning, the temperature dropped fast. Their GPS tracker sent its last signal at 12:04 p.m. Halfway between Cold Spring Gap and the Ridge Trail, then silence. The next day, a ranger at the trailhead found Juniper sitting beside Rachel's car. The leash was frayed clean through, not chewed. Her paw pads were raw, as if she'd run for miles before returning. The back seat still held their spare supplies. Untouched, by the time the search teams mobilized, the forest had already begun to swallow its tracks. Helicopters skimmed the canopy. Search dogs cut through brush. Radios hissed through static. They found the couple's tent on the second day, collapsed in a clearing near Devil's Window, an overlook so steep that even seasoned climbers avoided it. Inside were two sleeping bags half-zipped, 2 mugs of coffee gone cold, a folded map marked with their trail route, and a note pinned to a fallen log. The handwriting was firm but unfamiliar. Stopped following the path. We'll meet at the mirror. At first, investigators thought it was nothing more than poetic shorthand, maybe a private joke, but Rachel's sister swore the phrasing was wrong. Her sister never used the word mirror in any journal or message. Aaron's handwriting was ruled out too. His letters leaned right. This note leaned left. Someone else had written it, or something had changed their hand. Rangers scoured every inch around the camp. No sign of struggle, no blood. The soil was undisturbed except for faint paw prints that ended abruptly near the edge of the overlook. From that height, the forest below spread like an ocean of red and copper leaves, too dense for even a body to break through visibly. The sheriff ordered ropes, drones, thermal cameras. Nothing. By the 4th day, the story hit local radio. 2 hikers missing near Devil's Window, the announcer said. Locals shook their heads and muttered, "Not again." It wasn't the first disappearance along that stretch. Old-timers remembered miners who vanished near the same ridge in the 1940s. Search teams that found campfires still burning, but no footprints around them. Folklore said the mountain showed travelers what they wanted to see, then took it away. As the week dragged on, that folklore grew louder than the facts. Some said the pair had run off together, seeking some hidden commune in the woods. Others whispered about reflections seen at dusk along the cliffside, a shimmer in the stone that looked like water. The ranger station's logbook filled with theories, half of them starting with "I heard." The families arrived by the weekend. Rachel's father stood by the command tent, gripping the map until his knuckles went white. She was careful. He kept saying, she knew these trails. Aaron's brother refused to leave the overlook even as night fell, calling their names into the darkness until the radios ordered everyone back. The wind turned cold on the 5th night. carrying the scent of rain. Helicopters circled one last time, their lights sweeping over the endless ridges. Down below, the search team's campfires dimmed under the drizzle, glowing like tiny embers in the sea of dark trees. Every volunteer heard the same sound as they packed to leave, the echo of their own voices bouncing off the rock face, distorted, repeating the same phrase back to them in fragments. The mirror, the mirror. By morning, the search was suspended. The dog was taken in by Rachel's parents. The tent, the mugs, and the note were sealed in evidence bags and locked away in the county station. The official report called it probable exposure or fall, but even the sheriff couldn't bring himself to sign that line without hesitation. And so the Blue Ridge grew quiet again. The hikers vanished, leaving behind only a campsite, a cryptic message, and a trail that led nowhere. Yet as the wind moved through the hollows and rattled the last brown leaves, some locals swore they still heard faint laughter echoing from the ridgeline, two voices blending with the whisper of the trees. Helicopters swept once more over crimson forests, their rotors stirring the fog like ghosts rising from the canopy. Campfires went out one by one, and long after the searchlights faded, the wind carried those same words across the valley, soft and endless as breath. We'll meet at the mirror. For 2 weeks after the hikers vanished, the Appalachian sky stayed a strange, unbroken gray. Helicopters buzzed over the valleys like restless insects, their blades scattering fog that clung to the ridges. State rescue units poured into the Blue Ridge backcountry. Teams of men in bright orange jackets sent dogs darting through the brush, and volunteers with radios crackling through static. The command tent at Devil's Window became a temporary city of maps and thermoses. On the second morning, a drone operator called out that his feed had picked up a heat bloom beyond the ravine. When they hiked to the coordinates, there was nothing but cold stone and pine needles. The next day, thermal sensors went quiet, as if the forest had learned their pattern and decided not to answer. The only thing that did answer was static, short bursts, brief, sharp, irregular. One technician swore it matched the hikers' emergency frequency. Another said it sounded like interference from the valley's magnetic field. The radio operator wrote down the timestamps anyway. Each burst came 12 minutes apart, always ending with the same low hum, like a breath caught halfway between signal and silence. Detective Jonah Rusk arrived on the 5th day, at 45. He was a transfer from the Bureau, a profiler who'd spent a career mapping the darker corners of human behavior. He looked out of place in the mud, his pressed jacket catching the scent of pine sap and diesel. When he met the local sheriff, he asked for the note first, not the map. He held it under the pale light of the tent lamp, tracing the words with his thumb, stopped following the path. We'll meet at the mirror. That's not panic, he said quietly. That's intent. Rusk didn't believe in mountain curses or spirits, but language fascinated him. The way people under pressure revealed their subconscious through choice of words. The phrase "stopped following the path" implied awareness, not disorientation. The second half, "we'll meet at the mirror," was harder to classify. It wasn't code, at least not any he knew. It sounded like prophecy. He walked the trail himself that afternoon, stopping every few hundred feet to listen. The forest was dense, but not hostile. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against the eardrums, where even your heartbeat seemed too loud. Halfway up the ridge, he met a local guide who told him, almost casually, "They're not the first. The mountain's got 2 trails, one for the living, one for the ones who've crossed over." Rusk nodded politely, jotting it down as local folklore. But later that night, when the radios caught another burst of static, he found himself replaying those words. The investigation grew stranger by the day. No tracks beyond the overlook, no drag marks, no sign of the hikers ever turning back toward camp. The only new evidence came from a ranger station 10 miles away. A torn page found in a trail register, smeared with damp and faded ink. It read, "Saw reflections walking beside us." The handwriting was slanted, looping, a near match to Rachel Dean's. The word reflections was underlined twice. The rest of the page had been ripped away. The discovery fanned the flames of rumor at the diner in town. Truckers traded theories between cups of coffee. Some said it was a lover's pact, that the pair had planned their own vanishing. Others whispered about an old cave cult that met under the ridge, offering mirrors as passage between worlds. A few older locals talked about a Cherokee story, the tale of the looking path, where those who stared too long into still water saw a second trail, a reflection of their own world turned backward. Most dismissed it as superstition, but in Rockford, superstition had a way of surviving longer than memory. Rusk spent evenings in the ranger's office reviewing footage from search drones. The images flickered in black and white, patches of frost, deer moving through brush, the occasional glint of metal that always turned out to be nothing between clips. The camera caught the soft rustle of leaves and the rhythmic tap of rain on canvas. The sound felt almost like breathing. He told himself it was coincidence. He told himself that a forest is only as haunted as the stories you bring into it. Weeks passed. Search tents collapsed under early snow. The dogs were sent home. The last helicopter circled once over the ridge and peeled away into the clouds. Officially, the case was closed as presumed exposure deaths. Unofficially, no one believed it. The bodies hadn't been found, and that note, those 5 words, refused to fit into any box of logic or loss. Before leaving the mountain, Rusk visited the overlook one last time. The air was colder now, the ground already dusted with frost. He stood at the edge where the tireless wind poured up from the valley, watching fog rise like smoke from an unseen fire. He could hear faint static from the radio clipped to his belt, a weak signal that faded the moment he stepped forward. That night, back at his office, he unfolded the copy of the note and pinned it above his desk. The paper looked fragile under the lamp, as if light itself might erase the words. He sat there for a long while, trying to imagine 2 hikers stopping in the middle of nowhere, writing something that felt like a farewell, yet carried no fear. Maybe it was a message meant for each other, maybe for whoever followed. When he finally turned off the light, the reflection of the note lingered faintly in the window glass, reversed and ghostly. The words backward but still legible. Roram 8 Tatim LLEW. He stared at it for a moment, that mirrored version of the message, and felt a quiet chill settle in his chest. He didn't know why then, but he would keep that paper with him for the rest of his life. The investigation froze with the November snow, but something in Rusk refused to let the case fade. Even after he was reassigned, the note stayed above his desk, aging, curling at the edges, whispering to him through memory and static. The file might be closed, but the mountain wasn't finished speaking. 2 decades passed. The forest grew back over the old search paths, and the story of the missing hikers faded into folklore told around campfires. By spring of 2023, the Blue Ridge looked almost untouched by memory, green again, alive again. A group of weekend hikers from Asheville came to film their trek for social media. They brought drones, GoPros, and bright nylon tents that glowed like flags against the wilderness. None of them had heard of the 2003 disappearances until their second night on the trail. When an older ranger mentioned the legend of the mirror, they laughed it off, as people always did. On the 3rd morning, as their drone drifted over Devil's Window, the camera caught a glint wedged between the stones of the overlook. At first they thought it was just litter, a scrap of metal or plastic left by another group, but when they zoomed in, it looked deliberate, rectangular, laminated, pressed tightly between 2 slabs of quartz. The caption on their video read, "Someone left a note in the rocks, creepy?" By the next afternoon, park rangers arrived to retrieve it. The object was weathered but intact, sealed in thin plastic that shimmered like glass under sunlight. Inside lay a single piece of white paper. The writing was unmistakable. The same slanted hand last seen in 2003. The same phrase, "We'll meet at the mirror." At first, everyone assumed it was a hoax, a local prankster copying the old legend. But the lab results said otherwise. The ink was modern, consistent with gel pens manufactured less than 5 years earlier. The paper fibers hadn't aged. The laminate seal had traces of adhesive produced after 2018. The note was new. Someone had written it again. Long after Rachel and Aaron were gone, when news broke, the story resurfaced everywhere. The Blue Ridge note returns after 20 years. The article drew the attention of a retired detective living quietly in Tennessee, Jonah Rusk. He was 65 now, slower, grayer. But the words still haunted him. The photo of the new note made his hand tremble. He drove to the ranger station the next morning. The original note folded neatly in an evidence bag he'd kept all those years. That same week, the state brought in a new specialist, Dr. Evelyn Kaur, a linguistic cryptanalyst from the University of Virginia. She studied everything from ancient ciphers to digital language patterns. The kind of expert who could find meaning in the way ink curved across paper. When she met Rusk, she didn't shake his hand right away. She just asked, "You kept the first one?" He nodded. Then we compare. Under a magnifier, the two notes looked identical, not just the phrase, but the pen pressure, the angle, even the microscopic ink breaks between strokes. It wasn't imitation. It was replication, down to the tremor in the loops. No one could copy handwriting like this by chance, Kaur said quietly. Either the same hand wrote both, or the second writer traced it perfectly from the first. She tested a theory, folding a high-resolution print of the note down its vertical center. She held it under mirrored glass. Half the letters overlapped to form a second, hidden sentence. When reflected, the phrase completed itself into something chilling. Follow the light beneath. It was a linguistic mirror. The message only visible when the paper faced its reflection. Rusk stared at it, the old tension rising in his chest. "It's not a warning," he said. "It's a map." The analysis didn't stop there. Moreno's old forensic protocols were revived. But technology had evolved since 2017. Microscopic samples of dust clinging to the laminate revealed traces of titanium and manganese, elements used in industrial drilling, not naturally found in surface soil. The isotopic ratio pointed to a specific origin: abandoned mine tunnels a few miles north of Devil's Window, sealed since 1984 after a collapse killed 3 workers. The report noted that those tunnels had been used briefly by the military for geological testing. The same ridge Rachel and Aaron vanished near. Rusk and Kaur visited the site together. The entrance was chained, half buried under vines and runoff. A rusted warning sign leaned against the rock. "Unsafe. No entry." Rusk ran his hand over the letters, feeling the cold bite of metal through his glove. For 20 years, he had convinced himself the case was buried. Now the mountain was talking again, and it was using the same handwriting. Meanwhile, a new voice joined the story. Rachel's younger brother, Daniel, who had been 16 when she vanished, was now a journalist and documentarian. He returned to the Blue Ridge with a small film crew, retracing his sister's steps. His narration framed the rediscovery not as a horror story, but as a search for understanding. "Every story my parents told ended with the same silence," he said to the camera. "I just want to know who wrote the words they never got to explain." The footage captured the contrast of old and new. Modern hikers scrolling on their phones while standing in the same fog that had swallowed his sister. He interviewed Dr. Kaur, who explained the mirrored syntax and the titanium residue. Her voice was clinical, detached, yet behind her precision lay fascination. "Someone wanted this to be found," she said. "Someone wants the message to continue." That night, Daniel filmed the overlook at dusk. The light turned the stone face into a dim reflection, as if the mountain itself held a secret image beneath its surface. He spoke softly to the camera. "If my sister's note was written again, then whoever left it is still out there. Or maybe they never left at all." Rusk watched the footage later. The old note and the new one spread side by side under lamplight. The handwriting shimmered slightly in the reflection of the window. Identical twins divided by 20 years of silence. He felt the familiar static rise in the back of his mind. The same hum that haunted his radio All those years ago, he whispered to himself, barely audible. If the note was written again, who left it this time? The expedition began just after dawn, when the mist still clung to the valley and the mountains looked half-formed in the light. The entrance to the old tunnel was nothing more than a rusted grate hidden behind laurel and moss, sealed with a county padlock that hadn't been touched in decades. The ranger crew cut through it while Rusk and Dr. Evelyn Core stood back, watching the fog spill like breath from the opening. The air that emerged was stale, cold, and faintly metallic. Methane sensors crackled softly, registering faint traces when they tested the interior walls. Core frowned at the readings. Unusual concentrations of mirror-grade silica, far purer than any local quartz deposit. They descended slowly, their headlamps casting narrow cones through the darkness. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Even the sound of their own boots seemed muted. Absorbed by the rock, the tunnel curved downward, branching into smaller shafts long collapsed under sediment. At 70 feet, the stone changed texture, rough granite giving way to a glimmering surface that caught and threw back their light. It looked as though the walls had been polished from within. Then the tunnel widened. The ranger in front stopped short and whispered, "You'll want to see this." They stepped into an underground chamber roughly the size of a cathedral nave. The walls were alive with reflection, hundreds of overlapping images of their flashlights, faces, and shadows rippling through translucent quartz. The ceiling dripped mineral water in perfect rhythm, each droplet scattering light across the floor. It wasn't a man-made room at all, but a geological miracle. Centuries of subterranean streams had carved and polished the chamber until it became a natural mirror. Core's voice was hushed. "It's real, the mirror they wrote about." Their lights swept across the floor, and the wonder turned to silence. Near the back of the chamber, half buried under rockfall, lay two figures. The skeletal remains rested side by side, facing the mirrored wall, one hand extended forward, the other clutching something no longer visible. The bones were clean, undisturbed by animals. Time had reduced everything to stillness. Rusk dropped to one knee, even through the years. The configuration was unmistakable, two people leaning toward their own reflections. The ranger called for evidence tags. But Rusk didn't move. He knew before the lab confirmed it. When the DNA test came back hours later, there was no doubt. Rachel Dean and Aaron Cole. It should have been closure, but nothing about the scene felt like an accident. Core crouched near the mirrored wall, running a flashlight beam across the quartz. At a certain angle, she froze. "There's something here," she whispered. Tiny grooves shimmered under the light. Letters, carved shallowly into the surface, reversed as though written from the reflection itself. She took a digital scan, flipped the image on her tablet, and the words appeared. "Don't look behind the light." The phrase sent a hush through the chamber. Rusk stepped closer, his reflection merging with the faint ghost of the words. "They had a knife," he murmured. "They tried to write from what they saw." Back at the surface, Core's compositional analysis revealed another layer of meaning. The quartz in that chamber was unusually pure, its refractive index capable of distorting light and electromagnetic fields. In practical terms, the mirror created false readings, compasses would spin, GPS would fail, echoes would bounce back from the wrong direction. For years, hikers who wandered too close to that area had reported disorientation, sudden dizziness, or the sense of being followed by their own reflections. What the folklore called the second trail wasn't supernatural at all. It was physics. The mountain itself could bend light into illusion, but that didn't explain everything. It didn't explain why the couple's remains were facing the wall, or why the new note had been written 20 years later in their exact handwriting. And it didn't explain the warning, "Don't look behind the light." Rusk lingered longer than the others. He removed his gloves and touched the quartz, feeling its smooth chill against his palm. In the reflection, his own face appeared beside theirs, aged, lined, the ghost of time between them closing for a moment. He saw the faint image of Rachel's camera strap still looped around a shattered tripod. fossilized in silt. They weren't lost, he said softly. More to the stone than to anyone else. They were found, just not by us. Cor looked up from her readings. Her expression unreadable. Found by what? Rusk didn't answer. They prepared the chamber for recovery, marking the remains, photographing every angle. But as they packed, Cor noticed something on the far wall, another glint of color beneath the mineral sheen. She brushed away the sediment with a soft brush, revealing a fragment of laminated paper caught between two quartz seams. The ink had bled, but the outline was unmistakable. The same phrase, the same handwriting, written long after the skeletons had settled into dust. Her pulse quickened. "Jonah," she called quietly. He turned his light toward her. The reflection split his beam into dozens of scattered ghosts across the wall. The chamber held one more message. Cor said, something written long after they died, for weeks after the discovery. The mirrored chamber was sealed off from public access. Scientists, forensic teams, and documentary crews waited for clearance while Rusk and Dr. Cor reviewed the last of the scans. They had already cataloged every etching on the quartz walls, every trace of mineral pattern, every anomaly the light revealed. But then, during one late-night pass with a high-frequency LiDAR scan, the computer highlighted a faint third inscription. So deep within the crystalline surface, it was almost invisible to the naked eye. When the image resolved, the letters appeared reversed, just like the others. Flipping the scan revealed a chilling new message. "We met them at the mirror. Leave it closed," unlike the original carvings. This one showed sharper edges, fresher mineral abrasion, and higher carbon density along the grooves. Cor sent a microfragment to the lab for verification. The result came back the next morning. The inscription was etched roughly around 2018, long after the hikers had died, long after the chamber had supposedly been sealed. Rusk stared at the report in silence. 2018 was the year the ridge went viral again. The year those hikers' drone footage first revealed the glint of the laminated note. The timing wasn't coincidence. Someone had entered the tunnels after that rediscovery, and someone had left a message of their own, cross-checking missing person records. Cor found a match, a man named Eli Harper, an experienced spelunker and amateur geologist, vanished in the same region that year. His last known post on a local exploration forum read, "Heading toward the quartz tunnels beneath Devil's Window. If it's real, I'll find the mirror." He was never seen again. Months later, rangers recovered his pack from a sinkhole less than half a mile from the site. Inside was a damaged GoPro camera. The footage had never been fully decrypted. Until now, frame by frame, the recovered video showed Harper crawling through the tunnels with a headlamp, narrating his descent. His voice echoed strangely, doubling back on itself, as though the rock repeated him with a delay. Then came a moment when his light struck the mirrored walls of the chamber. For a few seconds, the footage was serene, just glittering reflections, crystalline water dripping down from the ceiling. But then, the light began to move differently. Shadows shifted behind him. Though he wasn't moving, the beam seemed to fragment, bouncing through the quartz in impossible ways. Figures appeared, translucent outlines walking parallel to him, pacing step for step along the mirrored surface. He whispered into the camera, "They're still walking." The last frame caught a glimpse of his reflection turning toward him. No face, just light bending into human shape. Then the footage ended. Experts called it refracted luminescence, an optical illusion created by complex mineral reflection, light splitting into recursive patterns, a phenomenon of physics, nothing more. But to the locals, it was proof of what the old stories had always said. The mountain remembers. The souls of those who vanish within its trails don't disappear. They echo in the quartz, caught between reflection and reality. When the inscription was confirmed as Harper's handwriting, Cor reread the final phrase aloud. "Leave it closed." She looked at Rusk. "That's not a warning to us," she said. "It's a plea." He saw them. Rusk nodded slowly. "He met them," he murmured. "And he stayed." By the time the site was resealed, the air had turned to autumn again. the same season Rachel and Aaron first vanished. The official report listed the discovery as geological hazard, restricted zone, but among those who had seen the mirrored chamber, no one doubted that something deeper lingered there, something the mountain preferred to keep hidden. A few weeks later, the families gathered at the Devil's Window overlook. The sky burned with evening colors: amber, violet, fading gold. Below them, the Blue Ridge rolled out like a frozen ocean. Rusk stood quietly among them, hands folded behind his back. Daniel Dean filmed from a distance, his voice softer now, no longer chasing answers, but capturing peace. "The forest is quiet again," he said into the microphone, and maybe that's how they'd want it. In the small-town museum nearby, the original note now rested beneath a pane of mirrored glass. Visitors could see it two ways: the forward words and their reflection, each version completing the other. When you stood close enough, your own face appeared beside the message, faint and ghost-like, as if the trail itself looked back. Maybe that was the point all along. Maybe Rachel and Aaron never truly left the trail. Maybe, in the way mountains fold time and silence together, the trail simply became something no living traveler could follow. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and cold stone. The reflection in the museum glass trembled, then stilled again, and as Daniel's final narration played, it felt less like a closing line and more like a prayer. In mountains that remember every footstep, echoes can last longer than lives. Don't let their story fade into silence. Subscribe to keep their voices on the trail, and to remind us that some paths still wait to be found.